They erased her name in 10 minutes after 25 years of loyalty. But what they didn't know. She wasn't leaving empty-handed. She was coming back with a deal that would change everything. We've decided to take the department in a new direction. Today will be your last day with Franklin and Whitaker, Evelyn. The words didn't echo, they landed. Flat. Final. Like the sound of a door closing and being locked behind you. For a moment I thought I'd misheard him. The room was too quiet for reality. The hum of the HVAC overhead, the ticking of the brushed steel wall clock, even the low, almost reverent rustle of Brandon's steel adjusting the cuffs of his pinstripe suit. It all felt distant. Muffled. Like I was underwater. I looked across the table at him. His expression was crafted, deliberate. A look he'd probably practiced in the mirror that morning. Corporate regret. Lightly seasoned with pseudo-sincerity. The kind of face you make when you're about to pull the rug out from someone's life and want to look like it's hurting you too. Brandon had been with the firm for barely 9 months, parachuted in from a consulting giant out west with promises of modernization, efficiency, and a penchant for buzzwords that sounded like progress but smelled like cost-cutting. And now, here he was, sitting in a glass-walled conference room I helped design, terminating my career with 2 sentences and a copy-pasted script. 25 years. 25. I had been at Franklin and Whitaker longer than most of the office plants had been alive. I built the client relations department from the ground up, before we had automated systems, before we had boardrooms with espresso bars, before anyone had heard of Brandon Steele. Business decisions aren't personal, he added, sliding a manila folder across the polished mahogany toward me. I didn't touch it. Across from him sat Janine from HR. Her eyes were glued to her tablet, but I caught the way she flinched slightly when I didn't reach for the folder. She wasn't just uncomfortable, she was afraid. Afraid of what I might say or worse, what I might know. This is part of a broader realignment affecting several departments, she said, her voice trying to be soft but landing like static. It's not a reflection on your performance. Oh, but it was. Not in the metrics, maybe. Not in the quarterly reports or the retention charts I helped break records with. But in other ways. Less quantifiable ways. I was the oldest person in the department. The most senior. The highest paid. And suddenly, a liability in the eyes of a numbers-driven regime. I cleared my throat. My voice was steady. God bless muscle memory. Does Thomas know about this? I asked, referring to Thomas Whitaker, founding partner, my mentor, my friend. Brandon's jaw tensed. All partners were consulted, he replied coolly. I knew that wasn't true. Thomas had been in London for 3 weeks closing our expansion deal with a European investment group. This wasn't his doing. This was Brandon taking advantage of his absence. Best to do your housekeeping when the master's out of town. Security would escort me out, Brandon said. Standard protocol. Of course. I'd helped write that protocol 15 years ago, when we were half our current size and still believed in protecting people, not procedures. I stood slowly, brushing invisible dust from the crease of my navy skirt. I looked around the room. The chairs were newer, the table glossier, but the bones were the same. This place was built on relationships, on trust, on loyalty, on people like me. And now I was nothing more than a line item. As I stepped into the hallway, all I could think was, so this is how legacy ends. Not with a celebration, but with a silent escort. But what Brandon Steele didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that legacy doesn't live in titles or desks or corner offices. Legacy lives in people. And I had 25 years worth of them. I didn't cry. Not in the conference room, not on the elevator ride down, not when I handed my badge to the security guard who couldn't even meet my eyes. I didn't cry when I stepped out onto the sidewalk in front of Franklin and Whitaker for what was supposed to be the last time. But when I opened the door to my office, my real office, the one I'd spent over 2 decades in, and saw the empty banker's boxes waiting for me, that's when the silence started to hurt. I packed slowly, methodically. My hands moved on instinct, muscle memory guiding me through the farewell. A framed photo of our team at a charity gala, my favorite mug with the chipped rim, a stack of handwritten thank you cards from clients I'd shepherded through crises and mergers and market crashes. I ran my fingers over the embossed paperweight Thomas gave me on my 20th work anniversary. For loyalty and leadership, TW. I left the folder Brandon slid across the table untouched. I didn't need to see the numbers. I already knew what I was worth, and what they thought I wasn't. A small crowd had gathered by the glass partition outside my office, people pretending to pass by, too afraid to say goodbye but too curious to walk away. I offered a small nod.
No tears. No scenes.
Evelyn Carter did not do exits with drama. By the time I stepped outside, the sky had turned an iron gray, and the November wind sliced through my coat like paper. I didn't take a cab. I walked the 8 blocks home. It gave me something to do with my legs while my mind reeled in place. When I reached my apartment, everything looked exactly the same, which somehow made it worse. My corner plant still leaned too far toward the window. My mail was still scattered across the kitchen counter. The world hadn't stopped even though mine just had. I placed the banker's box on the dining table and sat in silence for a while. Not reading. Not eating. Just sitting. Listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the wall clock like they were all that tethered me to this version of reality. That's when I noticed the envelope. It had been slipped under my door. No return address, no postage. Just my name on the front, in neat, precise handwriting. I tore it open. Inside, a single sheet of paper. Don't go back. You don't know everything.
No signature. No explanation.
Just those 9 words printed in clean serif font, like it had been typed on an old-fashioned typewriter. I stared at it for a long time, reading it over and over. Was it a threat? A warning? A trick? My first instinct was to toss it, but something about its simplicity chilled me more than anything Brandon had said. And then the ache set in. I stood and walked to the hallway mirror. I hadn't looked at myself all day, not really. Now I did. The woman staring back at me looked composed, sure. But her eyes betrayed something else. Not sadness. Not yet. It was something heavier. Like betrayal and disbelief had formed a weight behind my ribs, too solid to cry through. I reached up and unpinned the F&W badge from my coat collar. That tiny rectangle of plastic had once been a key, a badge of purpose, of permanence. Now it felt like a lie. I dropped it into the box. And then I did something I hadn't done in years. I let myself fall apart. Not loud. Not messy. Just a slow unraveling as I leaned against the mirror, forehead resting on the cool glass, and whispered the only question I could muster. What the hell just happened? Because I had a feeling this wasn't just about me losing a job. It was the beginning of something bigger. And someone out there knew it. The first call came the next morning. I was still in my robe, nursing a lukewarm cup of coffee and staring blankly at the note on my counter when my phone buzzed. Claire Montgomery, CEO of Montgomery Healthcare, our largest client for the past 12 years. She didn't bother with pleasantries. Tell me this is some sort of misunderstanding, she said, sharp and furious. I hesitated. It's not. There was a pause. The kind that vibrates with restrained anger. They replaced you with that girl, Amber? The one who tried to educate me on my own business model in front of my board? I don't accept this. I won't. Claire, I said gently. Franklin and Whitaker made a decision. It's out of my hands now. Well, it's not out of mine. Then she hung up. By noon, I'd heard from 3 more clients, each more incredulous than the last. Some offered words of support. Others were already threatening to terminate their contracts. I hadn't reached out to a single one of them. I didn't need to. Word was spreading like wildfire. And apparently I was the spark. Later that afternoon, the doorbell rang. A courier handed me a sleek black envelope embossed with silver foil. Inside, a business card from Madeline Bishop, the most connected headhunter in the Northeast, and a handwritten note. Evelyn, heard what happened. Let's talk. Some firms are ready to build a chair just to have you at their table. Attached was a preliminary offer from one of those firms. Double my former salary. Full autonomy. Executive-level benefits. My breath caught. I hadn't even updated my LinkedIn. By the time dusk settled in, I was beginning to feel the tide shifting. The narrative Brandon thought he'd control was already slipping away. Then came the twist. Jake, my former assistant, texted, "You still have admin access to the firm's shared drive? Check the incident log folder. Last upload, 11:42 a.m. Today. Curiosity 1. I logged in. It was an anonymous document titled Steele Report, Internal Misconduct. Inside, screenshots, charts, meeting transcriptions. A detailed account of how Brandon had been manipulating quarterly data, shifting client revenue across departments to pad performance metrics, inflating projections, costing the firm real money. At the bottom of the document, just 2 lines. This is just the beginning. Someone who still cares. I stared at the screen, adrenaline kicking in. The winds were changing. And this time I wasn't the one being swept away. 3 days after I was escorted out, Thomas Whitaker finally called. His voice crackled through the line, tight, hurried, oddly rehearsed. Evelyn, I just got back from London. I had no idea Brandon was planning this. None of this had my sign-off. I said nothing at first. Just let the silence sit between us like an unpaid debt. I was blindsided, he added. If I'd been here. But you weren't, I cut in. And someone approved the termination paperwork. It had your name on it. He sighed. Brandon must have. Save it, Thomas. My voice didn't rise, but the tremor beneath it betrayed me. You know what hurts the most? Not the firing. Not even the way it was done. It's that you didn't bother to stop it. You didn't ask. There was a pause. Let's talk. In person. I want to make this right. I didn't agree, but I didn't hang up either. That night, unable to sleep, I found myself staring at the Steele report again. The anonymous document had been scrubbed from the internal drive earlier that day, but I'd already saved it. Curiosity, or maybe instinct, told me to dig deeper. I remembered that the firm's document archiving system had an auto-backup function. I accessed the secondary server through an old administrative login that somehow hadn't been revoked yet. Took 15 minutes. And there it was, an email draft dated 2 weeks before I was let go. From Thomas's address. Subject line: Legacy Restructuring Strategic Discussion Notes. I clicked. We need to consider offloading higher salaried legacy employees before the new fiscal cycle. Evelyn Carter is likely the most sensitive. Removal, manage with care. Brandon, loop in HR on protocol logistics. I stared at the screen, chest hollow. Thomas, the man who gave me my first promotion. The man who toasted my 20th anniversary with a speech about loyalty and leadership. The man who said he didn't know. He'd known. He'd planned. My hand hovered over the mouse. I wanted to scream. Throw something. Delete everything. But instead I took a screenshot. Because now I understood something that hadn't occurred to me before. Brandon wasn't the architect of this betrayal. He was just the executioner. The plan, the rot, ran deeper. As I shut the laptop, my reflection caught in the darkened window. I didn't look angry. I looked awake. The boardroom was packed. Partners had flown in from across the country. Department heads, junior staff, even assistants crammed into every available space along the walls. No one was smiling. No one was talking. The air was thick with anticipation. At the head of the room, Thomas Whitaker stood stiffly behind the podium. He looked older than he had just a few days ago, shoulders tense, eyes shadowed by the weight of unraveling power. Thank you all for coming on such short notice, he began, voice solemn. As many of you are aware, recent decisions have led to significant client concerns. After careful deliberation, the board and I have decided to take corrective steps. Murmurs rippled across the room. I stood just inside the doorway, calm, composed, watching. I'm pleased to announce, he continued, that we've invited back one of our most respected and accomplished leaders. Evelyn Carter will be returning as a full equity partner, leading our new client strategy division. All heads turned. Silence. I stepped forward, heels clicking softly against the polished floor, and took my place beside him. Thomas looked at me with something that resembled hope, but I didn't look at him. I turned to the room. Thank you, Thomas, I said. My voice was steady, clear. But I'm afraid I have to decline. Gasps scattered like broken glass. I won't be returning to Franklin and Whitaker, I continued, because as of this morning, I'm a partner at Blackwell Consulting, the firm that has just finalized an agreement to acquire a controlling interest in F&W through Horizon Capital. Chaos. Someone dropped a pen. Another whispered a curse. Thomas's face went pale. This transition will begin next week, I added. Blackwell values the relationships this firm has built. Relationships I've helped nurture for over 2 decades. There will be no mass layoffs. unless inefficiencies make them necessary. That last word hung in the air, directed squarely at the back corner, where Brandon Steele once held court. His chair now sat empty. I stepped back. Thomas opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out, because there was nothing left to say. Later that day, I sat alone in the executive lounge, watching the Boston skyline through tinted glass. My inbox overflowed with congratulations, inquiries, even a few half-hearted apologies. But one message stood out. Subject: you were never alone. It was from Amber Sloan. I asked her to meet me the next day. She came, no makeup, no pretense. Just a brown trench coat and the weight of someone who had seen too much. I didn't expect it from you, I said. The email, the documents. You put yourself on the line. She looked me in the eye. I didn't do it for you. I nodded. You did it for yourself. I did it, she said, voice low, because I was next. I saw the signs, the grooming, the gaslighting, the restructuring. They were going to use me, then toss me just like you. I couldn't let them. For a moment we sat in silence. I don't need your approval, she added. Just thought you should know it wasn't pity. It was survival. I smiled faintly. That's the smartest kind of rebellion. Amber stood to leave but paused at the door. I'm not staying here. Not after this. But if you ever need someone who knows how the game works, I'll call you, I said. She left. And I sat there not as a casualty, but as a player who had just changed the rules. 2 weeks after the boardroom bombshell, Brandon Steele was officially gone. The announcement was terse, buried in a company-wide memo titled Leadership Transition Strategy. No farewell email. No all-hands call. Just a name wiped clean from the directory, and an empty corner office stripped of the chrome nameplate he'd hung with such smug pride. Thomas Whitaker, once the face of Franklin and Whitaker, stayed on barely. Reassigned as a senior advisor emeritus, he now held a ceremonial seat on the transition team. No power. No voice. Just a name on the letterhead, kept for legacy optics. He didn't fight it. Maybe he knew he couldn't. Or maybe he'd finally understood what he let rot under his watch. As for me, I didn't move back into my old office. I didn't need to. Blackwell Consulting had taken over the top 2 floors of the same tower F&W once called home. The newly merged Blackwell Whitaker, a name I didn't choose but didn't object to, operated with leaner structure, clearer values, and one very important difference. People came first. In the first quarter alone, we retained 95% of F&W's client base, including every major healthcare, tech, and finance firm I'd built relationships with. Clients didn't care about logos. They cared about who answered their call, who understood their needs, who showed up when everything was on fire. And I did. I wasn't just a partner now. I was a decision maker. I reviewed the org chart and handpicked teams. I built a culture that rewarded listening over ladder climbing, client trust over cold conversion rates. I didn't need approval from Thomas. I didn't fear retaliation from Brandon. The company that once discarded me now bore my fingerprints on every floor. Every few days someone would knock on my door. An old colleague, a former doubter, asking for a meeting, a second chance, a role in what we were building. I gave some of them a shot. Others I didn't. Not out of spite. Out of clarity. Loyalty wasn't about showing up when things were good. It was about who stayed when the walls cracked. Amber Sloan emailed from Chicago last week. She'd accepted a position at a rising fintech firm. She thanked me for listening, for not making her feel small. I thanked her for doing what needed to be done, even when it wasn't easy. As I sat in my new office, the skyline of Boston stretching into sunset, I let myself take one full breath. A deep, grounded kind of breath I hadn't felt in years. I thought about the years they called me overpaid, the meetings they excluded me from, the way I was escorted out like a liability, and I smiled. Not because I'd won, but because I knew they'd never really understood what I was. I wasn't a title, or a line item, or a fading photograph in the HR hallway. I was the relationship, the reason those clients stayed, the voice they trusted in chaos, the steady hand they needed when strategy wasn't enough. They forgot that, but I didn't. They thought I was a cost, but to the people who mattered, I was the value. In professional services, systems are just the shell. People are the gold inside.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Hit the bell icon for updates on new videos. See you next time.